the origins of modern medicine. So let us look at publications in ancient medicine coming from the time of the ancient pharaohs. We talked about the Edwin Smith Papyrus, the oldest complete book in the world being the Ebers Papyrus. Both of these great scrolls have given us detailed knowledge of what medicine was like in ancient antiquity. And it is important to know that the Ebers Papyrus recognized mental disorders such as depression and dementia, and they were covered to be treated with herbs. And as we said, in ancient Alexandria, the Greek knowledge of Hipparchus and others from Greece with the Egyptian knowledge, which was much more advanced because of mummification, among other things, led to the creation of great schools, Aristotle and Herophilus. Herophilus was deemed to be the first anatomist. He spent the majority of his life in Alexandria, and he was the first scientist to systematically perform scientific dissections of human cadavers. And he named many organs, including the duodenum. So Herophilus and Aristotle were two colleagues originally, but then they developed parallel schools of medicine. And in fact, to this day, anatomy departments in many parts of the modern world have a Herophilus Day to recognize his great contributions. And he identified other parts of the brain and the circulatory system. And we also had a cataloging all the herbs that were used, including the Dioscorides, the Materia Medica on medical material, a 5-volume encyclopedia related to that. And here he is represented on the cover of an Arabic manuscript of the 13th century. The eminent figures relied for centuries on this catalogue of herbal treatments that was developed by the great Dioscorides. And finally, Galen, the most accomplished physician of all of antiquity, who was born in Pergamon, and he came to study in Alexandria for a year before moving to Rome, where he became the personal physician to two successive emperors, Marcus Aurelius and Commodus. And he left the most complete texts on medicines in that period, which represents largely the summation of the Alexandrian knowledge in medicine. Galen had an enormous clinical experience, and he served as a doctor to gladiators in Pergamon in order to be able to get to know all the different kinds of fractures and wounds that were likely to be treated. He and Hippocrates believed in the 4 humors, the idea that phlegm led you to be dull and drowsy, yellow bile was irascible and choleric, blood was cheerful, passionate, sanguine, and black bile was melancholy. And depending on these balance between these 4 humors, people were either healthy or ill. But his manuscripts in Latin, and most of them were published right after the invention of printing, became essential parts of the canon that we know of medicine, but not the only ones. Galen in Greek and Arabic manuscripts had survived from the time of antiquity, and survived also an interesting and great transition between a scroll and a codex. Now, originally, almost all these manuscripts and documents were written on scrolls, and it was somewhere between 200 and 500 AD that people moved from the scrolls to the much more convenient form of the codex, which is the kind of book we still have, where pages are cut, where they're written on both sides, and where they're bound in a heavier exterior leather and have a spine. That was so convenient that it gradually displaced all the scrolls, and it survived as the fundamental form of the book to this day, because printing simply took the form of the codex, but instead of copying laboriously page by page, they actually went into massive printing of exactly the same copies of each page. Now that's roughly between 1440 and 1450. Johannes Gutenberg developed that press, and the incunabula, which were books published before 1501, were published on that press, including, of course, the famous Gutenberg Bible, which is a very valued book to this day. But all modern books are, in fact, the progeny of that enormous invention. The combination on one side of moving from scroll to codex, and the other one to actually use the codex for mass printing. And when that was accompanied by mass literacy and helped mass literacy, then of course we had an enormous outreach for knowledge and publications. But before we get to Europe after the invention of printing, we have to stop a moment and go over what was the Dark Ages in Europe, but was the Muslim Golden Age. From Spain to India, from Central Asia to Africa, the Muslim empires spread and they brought openness, knowledge, and science.